Barron Trump stayed silent for years until Jasmine Crockett dropped his name on live TV and forced him to face a truth even his own family never warned him about. They were only 12 minutes into the segment when it happened. The studio lights were sharp. The energy was tense but routine. Just another roundtable on Capitol View, the kind of Sunday morning political show that people watched half distracted while brewing coffee or folding laundry. Representative Jasmine Crockett, dressed in a deep navy suit, sat poised between two familiar pundits. Across from her sat Victor Levinson, an ex-lobbyist turned political commentator with a habit of interrupting everyone mid-sentence. They were talking about ethics, specifically about investigations that had been quietly ramping up behind the scenes. Campaign finance irregularities, conflicts of interest, hush money allegations. Nothing new, really. Until Jasmine leaned forward, locked eyes with the host, and said it. "I just find it wild," she said, voice even, "that nobody wants to talk about what happened with the trust realignment in January 2021, particularly the one that involved Barron Trump's name. That wasn't an oversight. That was intentional." The table fell dead silent. The host, a seasoned anchor named Deirdre Collins, blinked hard and cleared her throat like she was trying to swallow a rock. Victor smirked, assuming Crockett had slipped. But she didn't flinch. She sat there calmly, like she'd been waiting to say it for months. Deirdre tried to pivot. "Congresswoman, just to clarify, are you alleging that Barron Trump was involved in a financial transfer at the end of the Trump presidency?" "I'm saying there's a paper trail with his name on it, and we ought to stop pretending it doesn't exist." The control room cut to commercial faster than anyone could react, but it was too late. Within 5 minutes, clips were online. The full quote, the face reactions, the stammer from Deirdre, the smirk from Victor, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, everyone was posting their own version of the moment. Hashtags were already taking off before the segment returned from break. Inside the control room, a junior producer whispered, "This one's gonna blow." And it did. There hadn't been a live TV moment that unpredictable since Katie Couric caught a senator lying about Afghanistan troop numbers back in 2011. But even then, it hadn't touched a former president's child, especially not one who had barely spoken in public in his life. Phones started ringing. Journalists texted each other in all caps. On a cable news panel in Austin, a political analyst actually removed her earpiece mid-show and asked if someone could confirm whether the claim had legs. No one could. But the damage had already been done. Back on set, during the next segment, Jasmine didn't walk it back. She doubled down. "I'm not attacking a child," she said. "I'm pointing out how power protects itself. If Barron Trump's name was used in that realignment, then let's talk about it. Let's stop pretending some people are too sacred to question." Victor shook his head. "You're politicizing a kid." "I'm politicizing documents," she snapped back. "If a name is used in a trust structure to protect wealth from scrutiny, that's not off limits. That's a red flag." The host ended the discussion early. No one clapped. No one laughed. It wasn't that kind of moment. Backstage, a junior intern held a phone up and whispered to another staffer, "Barron's name is trending everywhere." But what no one knew yet was how close that name drop came to the one person who wanted nothing to do with any of this. The clip lasted just under 40 seconds, but it didn't matter. The damage was instant, and it all came down to 12 carefully chosen words. Let's stop pretending some people are too sacred to question. But to understand how those words shook so many people, especially the Trump family, we need to rewind just a bit. A week before the show, Jasmine Crockett had been forwarded a confidential file. It came from a staffer on the House Oversight Committee. No names, no explanations, just a scanned document stamped with the date, January 12th, 2021. The file included paperwork from a blind trust adjustment that had taken place in the final 8 days of Trump's presidency. In the section detailing beneficiary names, there was something unexpected. One of the custodial structures listed the name Barron William Trump. Crockett, a former civil rights attorney, had seen hundreds of financial records. This one wasn't standard. Barron's inclusion wasn't just unusual, it was strategic. The kind of name you'd insert when trying to transfer holdings quietly, banking on the public's assumption that the youngest Trump had always been off limits. She sat on the document for days, debated what to do with it, brought it up with her chief of staff, a no-nonsense woman named Patrice Lattimore. "You bring that up on air," Patrice warned, "and they'll call you a monster. They'll say you're dragging a kid into politics." Jasmine had stared at her screen, fingers steepled. He's 20 now. They used his name. That's not a child. That's a shield. And so she took it with her to the studio, half expecting she wouldn't say a word. But the second Victor Levinson started talking about unfounded witch hunts against conservatives, something snapped. Jasmine had worked too many cases, watched too many people with power hide behind the label of victim. She'd had enough. She wasn't reckless. She didn't accuse Barron of anything criminal. She simply dropped the truth on live television and watched the room go silent. In the days that followed, news anchors dissected her wording frame by frame. She never said he committed fraud, one anchor pointed out. But she implied he was part of it, another replied. Legal experts chimed in. One former IRS investigator told a podcast that using a family member's name in last-minute asset shielding wasn't illegal, but it could be an intentional strategy to slow down investigations or avoid transparency. Online, the reaction was ferocious. Supporters of Crockett praised her for finally speaking truth to power, but just as many accused her of going too far. Barron has done nothing wrong, read one popular tweet. He's a young man who's tried to stay private. Why drag him into the swamp? But behind the noise, a quieter conversation was happening in Washington. Political insiders began trading theories. Who gave Crockett the file? Was there more to it? Was this a leak from someone trying to burn a bridge with the Trump circle? And then someone found a detail everyone else missed. An archived press release from February 2021, issued by a Delaware-based financial firm, confirmed a trust restructure dated exactly 3 days after Barron's name appeared on that document. No names were listed publicly, but the timeline matched. Someone had clearly moved money quickly and quietly. The pieces were starting to form a picture, even if the full canvas wasn't visible yet. And at the center of it was the question Jasmine had posed. If you're willing to use someone's name to protect wealth, are they really uninvolved? But Barron hadn't seen the segment live, and when he did, everything shifted in a very personal way. Barron Trump was at a cafe in Sarasota when his phone started vibrating nonstop. It was late afternoon, and the Florida sun was still cutting through the palm trees outside. He was sitting across from his childhood friend, Drew Mallory, sipping an iced coffee and flipping through a college course catalog. He wasn't enrolled yet, but he was thinking about it. Philosophy or computer science? Maybe both. He'd been keeping a low profile for years. No Instagram, no podcast, no interviews. Just quiet. That's how he wanted it. Politics had taken enough out of his family. He'd seen the rallies, the protests, the headlines about his father, and none of it had ever felt real to him. Not the cheering, not the hate, just noise in the background. But today, the noise got personal. The first text came from a cousin in Nevada. You good? Turn on the news. Then a missed call from his mother. Then 2 from a blocked number. Then another text. Dude, what did Crockett just say about you? Barron blinked. What the hell is going on? Drew looked up from his phone. Man, you might want to see this. He turned his screen toward him. Someone had clipped the exact moment from Capitol View. Jasmine Crockett leaning forward, calm as stone, dropping his full name like it was just another line in the script. Barron's breath caught somewhere between his ribs. His hand tightened around the cup. He didn't say anything at first, just watched it again and again. Why would she say that? He asked finally. Drew stayed quiet. Barron looked down at the table, the corner of the wooden surface chipped and scratched from years of use. There was a hum inside his head now, not anger, not fear exactly, just something tangled he couldn't name, like being exposed without even being present. He stood up abruptly. Let's get out of here. They left the cafe, pushing past a small group of high school kids who were laughing too loudly. Outside, Barron pulled his hoodie over his head and walked fast. Not because anyone was chasing him, but because he didn't want to be still. He didn't want to feel the weight of the eyes he imagined were suddenly everywhere. Back at the condo, Melania was already pacing. She hadn't called again. She didn't need to. She just stared at him as he walked through the door. I told your father to stop using your name for those things, she said. No greeting, no hug. I told him years ago. Barron dropped his bag. So it's true? I don't know, she answered. Probably. He did a lot of things without telling me. Silence stretched between them. Did I sign something? He asked. No. Then how the hell does my name end up in a trust document? Melania looked away. Because that's how they work. They use names like yours, young, quiet, uninvolved, clean. He sank into a chair. That's not clean, that's messed up. She didn't argue, and that scared him more than anything. Later that night, he got a call from his father. He didn't answer, just stared at the phone until it went black again. He wasn't angry, not exactly, but something had cracked open, a quiet kind of betrayal. The worst part was that no one had warned him, not one word. The next morning, paparazzi were outside the gate, not dozens, just a few, but enough to remind him what it felt like to be pulled back into the public eye. One of them shouted, "Barron, is Crockett lying? Were you part of the trust?" He turned and walked inside without a word, but behind closed doors in Palm Beach, his name was being mentioned in a very different tone. Inside the Trump residence at Mar-a-Lago, the mood was sharp and sour. Donald Trump stood in the formal sitting room, pacing in slow, deliberate steps, the kind he took when he was forcing himself not to explode. A Fox Business segment played on mute in the background. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Crockett names Barron Trump in trust allegation, White House ties." He turned to his longtime attorney, Seth Delaney, a gray-haired man with the posture of someone who'd cleaned up too many messes. "She wasn't supposed to go there," Donald said. "You hear me? They've got rules. You don't touch the family. You don't touch him." Seth nodded slowly, but his silence was telling. He knew better than to remind Donald that the media didn't follow old rules anymore. Melania sat nearby, arms crossed, legs tucked underneath her like she was freezing in place. She hadn't spoken much since the night before. She didn't need to. Ivanka was on speakerphone from Miami. Her voice cut through the room, sharp and cold. "Dad, this is going to spiral. I just got off a call with Ronan. He says the networks are already requesting archived documents." Donald huffed. "Let them dig. There's nothing illegal." "But there's something," she replied. "And that's enough for them. This isn't 2016 anymore. You can't just wait it out." Melania finally spoke. "He didn't know, Donald." Her husband stopped pacing. "Who didn't?" "Barron." Donald blinked. "What are you talking about? Of course he didn't know. That's the point." "He's not a child anymore," she said, quieter. "He sees what's happening now, and he's angry." For a second, something flickered across Trump's face. Regret? Maybe, but it passed quickly. He turned back toward Seth. "Find out who gave Crockett that file. Someone had to leak it. I want a name. I want a face." Seth nodded again. "We'll look into it. But you should also think about whether it's time to make a public statement." Trump scoffed. "Absolutely not. You respond, you validate it. She's trying to bait me. I'm not giving her the satisfaction." In another wing of the property, Barron sat in his room staring at the ceiling. His phone buzzed again. This time a text from a number he hadn't seen since boarding school in Maryland. "Didn't think I'd see you trending. You okay?" He didn't answer, just swiped the message away. A quiet knock on his door. His father entered, slower than usual. "Mind if I sit?" Barron shrugged. "Sure." Donald sat at the edge of the desk chair, spinning it slightly with one hand, like he used to when Barron was small. He looked at his son, now taller than him, face unreadable. "I didn't think it would blow back like this," Trump said, looking straight ahead. Barron kept his eyes on the ceiling. "Why use my name?" "You weren't involved in anything. It was paperwork. That's all it was. A name helps make things stick, makes it look clean." "You mean I make it look clean?" There it was. Donald didn't argue, didn't deflect. For once, he let the silence stretch. "I didn't want this," Barron said. "I've spent my whole life trying to stay out of this mess." Trump nodded slowly. "Sometimes you don't get to choose what gets attached to your name." "I didn't attach anything," Barron said, finally looking at his father. "You did." That landed harder than Donald expected, but while the family scrambled for damage control, the outside world was starting to peel back more than just one layer. By the time Monday rolled around, Barron Trump's name had been mentioned on every major news channel at least once. Not as a footnote, not as a by the way, but front and center, woven into headlines, podcast intros, TikTok explainers, and political blogs with red arrows drawn on screenshots. CNN ran a split screen showing Jasmine Crockett's live moment side by side with a silent photo of Barron walking through an airport. MSNBC had a panel arguing whether the mention was justified or reckless. On Fox, the tone was angrier, calling the whole thing a targeted smear against an innocent young man. It didn't matter that the full facts weren't out yet. The internet wasn't waiting for confirmation. It rarely does. Clips of Crockett's statement racked up over 20 million views in the first 24 hours. Someone edited it into a dramatic montage with violin music. Another turned it into a meme. Jasmine at the table, Barron's face photoshopped onto an explosion in the background. The internet doesn't do nuance. Hashtags took off. Said Barron Trust, Crockett Files, Too Sacred. To question. Even Poor Barron started trending, mostly from people defending him. But it didn't stop the speculation. A Reddit thread claiming to have inside info from a former White House staffer racked up 15,000 comments. It included grainy screenshots of alleged financial documents, most of them doctored. But again, truth didn't matter. The audience had already made up its mind. Some believed Barron was a puppet in his father's scheme. Others thought the whole thing was a deep state setup to damage Trump before the next election cycle. Then came the live streams. YouTubers and political commentators hosted hours-long panels with names like The Secret Trump Trust, What We Know, and Barron Speaks. One guy in Portland claimed to have leaked emails from Deutsche Bank, but couldn't produce a single document. Still, 200,000 people watched him talk about it. Even journalists who had ignored Barron for years were now scouring public records for anything: a signature, a college application, a property listing. Privacy, once a given for the youngest Trump, was gone in less than 48 hours. Meanwhile, in Miami, Jasmine Crockett's team was overwhelmed. They hadn't expected this much fallout. Hate mail flooded their inbox, but so did praise. Dozens of voters from across the country sent messages thanking her for saying what others were too scared to. One retired schoolteacher from Oregon wrote, "For the first time, someone said what we've all been thinking, that no name should be untouchable if it's protecting corruption." Crockett's press secretary begged her to issue a clarifying statement, something that would ease the heat and shift focus, but Jasmine wasn't interested in backpedaling. "I didn't accuse anyone," she told her team. "I exposed a detail. If it wasn't true, they'd sue me already." The truth was, she was right. Despite the media chaos, the Trump legal team hadn't sent any official cease and desist letters, no threats of litigation, just silence. And that silence, to many, was louder than words. But the internet wasn't just talking. It was digging. A well-known political blogger based in Phoenix, someone who had broken 2 campaign finance stories in the last year, posted a thread that night hinting that he had found something in Delaware's public records. He didn't say what, not yet. Just a few cryptic posts, a timestamp, a trust registration number, and a screenshot of a file number that matched the one Crockett referenced in her notes. Suddenly, people weren't just reacting anymore. They were investigating. But the next move wasn't going to come from the media, or from Crockett, or even from Trump. It came from someone no one expected, Barron himself. Miles away from the storm circling Capitol Hill in Mar-a-Lago in a modest apartment above a liquor store in Phoenix, a man named Curtis Rojas sat hunched over 2 monitors. His apartment was cluttered, open legal pads, takeout containers, a rusted ceiling fan slicing the air above him. Curtis wasn't a journalist in the traditional sense. No degree, no desk at a news outlet. But he'd been right too many times to be ignored. 2 years earlier, Curtis had exposed a secret PAC funneling foreign money into a midterm campaign. The story got buried under flashier headlines, but those who paid attention remembered, especially the ones watching the money. He hadn't planned on looking into the Trump family again, but when Crockett said Barron's name on live TV, something in him clicked. He remembered seeing that name in a digital record months ago, a brief trust registration logged under Delaware's public access portal. Back then, it didn't mean anything. Now it might mean everything. He pulled up the portal again, typing slowly. Trump Trust, 2021. Nothing. He tried another angle. W. Trump. Still nothing. Then he remembered something an accountant once told him over a beer. When people want to hide wealth, they don't use obvious names. They use initials, shell firms, and third-party custodians. So Curtis searched for every trust registered between January 6th and January 15th of 2021 in the state of Delaware. 57 results. He scrolled through them slowly, matching addresses, cross-checking LLC managers. Then he found it. A trust registered under the name BW Legacy Holdings, filed January 12, 2021. Custodial designation, minor adult beneficiary. Mailing address listed a P.O. box tied to an accounting firm in Palm Beach. And at the bottom of the scanned document, in faint black ink, was a signature he'd seen before on a White House visitor's log. M.A. Yanovitz, Trump's longtime family tax lawyer. Curtis leaned back in his chair. He didn't jump to conclusions. He made copies, pulled linked documents, dug through public LLC records. The deeper he went, the more it became clear. This wasn't a one-time registration. It was part of a multi-step structure. Shell companies in Wyoming and South Dakota, all pointing back to the same financial web. The name Barron William Trump didn't appear again in full, but his initials did, BWT, listed under a section titled Deferred Beneficiary Designations. Curtis knew what that meant. It didn't mean Barron was managing anything, but it did mean someone was planning for him to benefit from it eventually. That made Crockett's comment more than speculation. Now came the hardest part, going public. He could post the files, but trolls would tear them apart. Or worse, they'd dig into him, call him a liar, or try to spin it as a political hit job. He paced the room, heart rattling. Finally, he posted one document. Just one. With a simple caption, "Why was this trust, listing BWT as a beneficiary, created 3 days before the end of the Trump presidency? And why has no one asked?" The tweet caught fire. People started piecing it together. BWT, January 12th, Trump tax lawyer, Palm Beach. It was enough to reignite the whole conversation. Curtis got a DM within 20 minutes from a freelance reporter in Jacksonville. "Are you sure that's who you think it is?" He replied, "Yes, but I'm not the one who needs to explain it. They are." Back in Sarasota, Barron saw the tweet while scrolling in bed. He read it 3 times. No denials from his family, no explanations from any lawyer, just silence. He sat there staring at the screen. For once, the questions weren't being asked about him. They were being asked around him, and the pressure to answer was closing in fast. But instead of staying silent, Barron made a decision that would flip the narrative again. Barron hadn't posted anything publicly in years, not since a forgotten SoundCloud account from high school, and even then, it was just music. No voice, no face. He preferred the background. That was the agreement, unspoken but firm. Stay low, don't react, and the world would forget he existed. But this wasn't just noise anymore. His name was everywhere, chopped into memes, dissected by analysts, shouted across networks. The trust, the initials, the signatures. Even his middle name had become ammunition. He wasn't built for this. Not in the way his father was. Not in the way Ivanka had trained herself to be. He wasn't a strategist. He was just a kid who'd been dragged into a world he'd actively avoided. Late Tuesday night, in a group chat with a few people he trusted, Barron finally said it. "I think I want to say something." One friend replied instantly, "Like, public?" Another, "Bro, careful, that'll just make it worse." But it didn't feel worse than silence. It felt like drowning. He opened his notes app and started typing, deleted it, tried again, then again. Nothing sounded right. Everything came off defensive or stiff. But he couldn't shake the pressure building in his chest. It was like the longer he waited, the more his silence was being interpreted for him. So instead of a statement, he reached out privately to someone who'd always treated him like a person, not a name, not a Trump. Her name was Leah Quinton. She had sat next to him for 2 semesters at Columbia Prep. Now, she ran a modest but growing independent news channel on YouTube, mostly social commentary and mental health discussions. Nothing flashy. He messaged her late that night. "Not sure you'll want to touch this, but I'd rather speak to someone real than be chewed up by CNN." She replied within minutes. "You sure?" "Yeah." The next afternoon, Leah flew to Sarasota. They didn't film, they didn't mic up. She brought a handheld recorder, no lights, no makeup team. Just 2 chairs in a quiet room with the blinds half closed. Barron didn't want the world to see his face, but he wanted them to hear his voice. The recording ran just under 15 minutes. Most of it was slow, unsure, measured. Barron never denied that the trust existed, but he also didn't pretend to understand it fully. I never signed anything. I didn't even know about it until last week. If someone wants to hand me something in a vault when I'm 30, fine. But don't use my name like I signed up for all this. I didn't. When Leah asked how he felt watching it all unfold, his voice cracked slightly. It's weird, seeing people talk about you like you're either a victim or a villain. I'm not either. I'm just trying to be normal. She didn't press. She didn't have to. The pauses said as much as the answers. Barron ended the conversation with a quiet, almost embarrassed reflection. I think people need to stop pretending the silence from someone young means they're fine with what's going on. Sometimes we're just tired of being spoken for. Leah posted a snippet that evening, audio only. The internet exploded. Some people still called it a PR stunt. Others praised him for being more transparent than anyone else in his family had ever been. Hashtags flipped overnight. Let Barron speak trended for hours. But something shifted, not because of what he revealed, but because of how raw it sounded, honest, unscripted, human. The political world didn't know what to do with that. But while Barron's words sparked empathy, Jasmine Crockett was now facing her own internal battle, and the pressure was mounting fast. Jasmine Crockett stood by the tinted window in her D.C. office, watching the sky bruise over Capitol Hill. Her phone buzzed on the desk behind her for the 6th time in 5 minutes, but she didn't turn around. She already knew what the messages were about. Ever since Barron's audio interview with Leah Quinton hit the internet, things had shifted. Not against her necessarily, but not in her favor either. The press had started reframing the story, less about the trust, more about the ethics of naming someone like Barron on live TV. The headlines said it all. Crockett's statement sparks empathy for Trump's son. Was it a step too far? Barron speaks, nation listens. Should Crockett respond? Inside her office, her staff was on edge. Phones were ringing constantly. Emails poured in by the dozens, some praising her, others calling her every name imaginable. Her chief of staff, Patrice Lattimore, paced just behind her, clutching a tablet with talking points for the press briefing they'd been dodging all week. You don't have to apologize, Patrice said quietly, but you do have to say something. You're letting everyone else steer this. Jasmine didn't answer right away. She was tired, not from guilt, because deep down, she didn't regret saying it. She regretted how it came out, maybe, but not the substance. She turned from the window. They're shifting the focus, making it about tone, not truth. I know, Patrice said, but tone gets people listening. Truth just keeps them arguing. Jasmine rubbed her temples. Do you think I went too far? Patrice didn't lie. I think you went farther than people were ready for. That night, Jasmine recorded a short video from her home. No podium, no flag in the background. Just her, in a plain sweatshirt, seated at a kitchen table. She didn't walk anything back, but her voice was softer, measured, less courtroom, more conversation. To the people who felt I crossed the line, I hear you. I understand the reaction. And I also believe we can talk about systems of power without pretending certain names are immune. My job isn't to protect feelings, it's to protect fairness. She paused before the last line. Then, with a quiet firmness, if a name was used, it should be questioned, even if that name belongs to someone who didn't ask to be involved. That's not an attack, it's accountability. The video went viral within the hour. People split quickly. Some thanked her for staying strong. Others said she missed the moment to show grace. But one thing was clear, she wasn't going away quietly. Meanwhile, her office received a package, no return address. Inside was a thin manila envelope, printed documents, 3 pages, listing dates, trust transactions, and one very specific notation. Custodial override filed under adult minor clause. It was a term few outside the legal world understood, but to Crockett, it was a red flag. Someone was still leaking, and they wanted her to keep going. Patrice frowned at the papers. You think this is bait? Jasmine shook her head. No, it's a door, and someone's daring me to walk through it. She tucked the envelope into her briefcase and locked it. Later that evening, she rewatched Barron's interview with Leah, watched the part where he said, I didn't sign up for any of this. For the first time, Jasmine didn't see a last name. She saw a kid with a father who made decisions in boardrooms without explaining them. It complicated things, but the person it hit hardest wasn't Jasmine. It was someone still trying to make sense of everything at home. Barron sat at the edge of the pool behind the Sarasota condo, knees pulled to his chest, earbuds in, but no music playing. The water reflected the moonlight in broken, uneven strips, like the surface was trying to speak in a language only he could understand. He hadn't gone online all day. The silence felt cleaner. His mother sat a few feet away, wrapped in a light shawl, holding a mug of tea that had gone cold. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Melania finally broke the silence. I watched the interview. He glanced over. Yeah? You sounded like yourself. Barron gave a tired smile. That's good. I wasn't trying to sound like anyone else. She hesitated. Do you want to know what your father said about it? He shrugged. Not really. Melania sipped the tea anyway. He said you were careful, that you didn't give them anything to twist. He was relieved. Barron nodded, still looking at the water. I think he was also a little scared, she added. He looked at her, brow raised. Of what? Me saying more? No, of you saying exactly enough. He didn't respond, but something about that line lingered. Inside, the TV was still playing. CNN was running a segment on political families and privacy lines. The host was mid-sentence. Should children of public figures be held accountable for financial decisions made in their name? Barron stood up and shut it off. Later that night, his father arrived unannounced. Melania let him in without a word. He walked through the door slowly, wearing his usual navy blazer, no tie. He looked more tired than usual, like the weight of the last week had sunk into his bones. Can we talk? He asked. Barron sat down on the couch. His father didn't take the seat across from him. He stood, hands in his pockets. I know this isn't how you wanted to be seen, Trump said. And I never wanted this either. Not for you. Then why use my name? There was no accusation in the question, just weariness, honesty. Trump looked away. Because I thought it was harmless. I didn't think it would ever matter. It was protective. Protective for you, Barron said. Not for me. His father looked like he wanted to say something sharp, to push back, but he didn't. Instead, he walked to the window and stood there in silence. I'm not mad that people know, Barron said after a moment. I'm mad that I didn't. Donald Trump turned around. You think I didn't want to tell you? Barron shook his head. I think you didn't think you had to. His father let out a short breath, part frustration, part acceptance. I didn't see the harm. Well, now you do. The room went quiet again. Then Barron said something that landed heavier than either of them expected. I don't want to be part of the brand. Trump looked confused. What brand? You know what I mean. The words sat there between them like a challenge. Donald Trump didn't respond immediately. He just nodded slowly, then walked toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. You did good with that interview. You were calm, direct. I wasn't performing, Barron said. I was just trying to sound like me. Trump held his gaze for a beat longer, then left without another word. That night, Barron opened his laptop and started writing. Not a statement, not a post. Just thoughts. Scattered, honest, unfinished. About identity, inheritance, silence. He didn't know what he'd do with it yet, but it felt better than saying nothing. But while father and son reached their quiet standoff, the country was still asking the bigger question. Where does responsibility end when legacy begins? By the end of the week, the conversation had moved past headlines. People weren't just asking what Jasmine Crockett said or why Barron Trump responded. They were asking why it took so long for anyone to notice what had been hiding in plain sight. In living rooms, on college campuses, on talk radio in Kansas, and diners in Wisconsin, folks were having real conversations, not about politics, but about the lines between family and power, privacy and accountability. It wasn't about whether you liked the Trumps or hated them. It was about what happens when your name carries a legacy you never chose, and when silence is mistaken for consent. One high school civics teacher in Spokane turned the whole scandal into a classroom debate. The prompt on the whiteboard read, "Does being connected to power mean you owe the public more transparency?" Responses varied. Some students said yes. Others said no, but none of them shrugged. That was the shift. Even in Washington, the tone had changed. Lawmakers, both red and blue, were more cautious, more aware that people were paying attention in ways they hadn't expected. Jasmine Crockett, for her part, went quiet for a few days. She turned down interviews, ignored morning show invites, and refused to escalate the story. She knew she'd said enough, and that now it wasn't about her anymore. The conversation had its own momentum. And Barron? He stayed out of the public eye. No new statements, no follow-up interviews, but friends close to him said he seemed lighter. Not happy, but clear. For once, people saw him as a person, not just a headline in waiting. He kept writing, too. Somewhere in his notes was a line he circled twice. Just because I didn't speak up before doesn't mean I was okay with it. That line said more than any press release could. In a country where politics moves like a storm, loud, fast, often senseless, this story lingered. Not because of the scandal itself, but because of the questions it forced people to ask. Should children of the powerful be protected, or should they be accountable? Is silence protection or complicity? And who gets to draw that line? People didn't agree. They weren't supposed to. But they were finally asking. And that might be the most honest place to start. Because at the end of the day, every name carries something. Some carry legacy. Some carry shame. Some carry nothing at all, but still get dragged along for the ride. But when you're born into power, even your silence speaks. And in Barron Trump's case, for once, he chose what that silence meant. If this story made you think, share it. If it made you question something you've taken for granted, talk about it. And if you believe that power, no matter the name, deserves transparency, don't look away when it's uncomfortable. Subscribe for more stories that ask the hard questions.